Okay, let's get going here. I know we're already 5 minutes late. I guess I forgot that some folks had a meeting to talk about the remote voting thing, so that thank you guys for doing that. So we have a guest again today, so welcome. It's here last month as well, and I suppose everybody's just outside. It's too damn nice to be in here. So, but we do have a quorum, so we're ready to rock and roll.
People have good excuses, so.
Oh.
Just for the record.
Some people had good excuses too. Yes. Okay. Yes. So, any adjustments to the agenda? All right. So let's go right into it. Small schools grants. Possible communication to the state board. Nicole.
So this was a request of Dan, I believe,
Yep.
to the board. So I sent you all the information that I have relative to the state board's process to date. So this is really your discussion. I have no.
What's the quick lay of the land, just to summarize? What's going on at the state level concerning that?
Well, in the packet, there was a flow chart somewhere in here.
Toward the end.
Hang on, just a second.
Third one. Third
3 pages from the end.
Yes.
The synopsis is it's harder.
So Act 46 changed eligibility for small schools grants. So effective July 1, 2019, there are sort of 3 opportunities to continue to receive a small schools grant. One is that you merged into a district that was eligible for incentives. The second is that, well, first of all, you need to be a small school. But then there's a question of geographic isolation, which is determined by the state board on an annual basis. If you're not determined to be geographically isolated, there's another path to small schools grants, and that is meeting excellence in operational efficiency standards. So at the March state board meeting, I believe, I sent you the minutes of the meeting. The state board had a discussion about geographic isolation, and they sort of decided, although took no formal action, that I believe it was 30 miles was the
30 minutes.
30 minutes, thank you. 30 minutes was the marker for geographic isolation. And then they spent time at their last meeting talking about excellence and operational efficiency standards, and I provided you with the minutes there. My understanding, I tried to find the agenda for next week's meeting, and I could not find it online. But my understanding is they're under a deadline to publish these standards by June, so they will likely take formal action at their meeting next Wednesday. And so the question that Dan raised was, does this board want to weigh in before the state board makes those decisions?
Dan?
So I am actually, the agenda is not out, it's correct, Nicole, but I believe I will be on that agenda for just a few minutes to discuss all of those parameters. My focus is going to be geographic isolation specifically. But, I don't know how much time I'll have. I might be able to, sorry. But I have typed up a sense of the meeting that, yeah, throw it out later. That I would like to pass around, and if this board today feels that it's appropriate, we could vote to support this sense of the meeting, and I would be able to have one more item in my arsenal when I go before the state board. I tried to make this as general as possible. It's not a, I don't think I have quite enough copies, but people can look on. It's not, good, yeah. It's not
Make
a,
some copies.
Yeah, we'll make some copies real quick.
make some copies. As Nicole pointed out last month, we can't really speak for the entire, for every school board member in the state, but we could conceivably speak as a board. So I was hoping that we might get a sense of the meeting of some such. I'm happy to edit it, change it in any way, or throw it out if people feel it's inappropriate.
So one thing, the second statement, I'm not sure if it's true or not, Dan, because this number will go down because some of the towns currently receiving these grants will merge. I mean, the grant money it's gonna change the name on the grant to a
Right.
merger support grant.
Right, so the total amount of money being spent on small school support grants will go down.
Okay, but actually that chunk of the pie is
Yeah.
still gonna be there, it's just half of it, part of it's got its name changed.
Yes,
Okay.
Okay.
right, and all they're discussing at the State Board of Ed are just the small school support grants, because the other ones are done deal.
They're- okay.
already going on,
All right.
yeah, so.
Nicole, can you flip the light on over there?
Yes,
Thank you.
You didn't actually want to read it. I was
Well,
reading it. It was good.
Life is good.
And I also don't, as I said last month, we got a lot of things to do tonight, we don't need to spend a lot of time on it. But,
we set aside quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
Okay,
for it.
all right.
We'll let everybody read it real quick and
Yeah.
digest it, and then you can speak to it, Dan.
Yeah.
I put them out there, so I can
So Dan, you wanna give us your thoughts here? Or is this everything we need to
That's-
know?
Yeah, I think that's the general gist of it, because I feel that small schools would merge. If it becomes harder for them to receive the small school grants, I think they're sort of being double dipped against, because not only didn't they get the merger grant that goes forward in perpetuity, but then if a smaller amount of money is allotted to small school support grants, it's making it more difficult for the unmerged schools to maintain their schools, and they're all in small. I removed the word vulnerable because Celeste felt that was unfair, but all of these schools are small and they're all in rural places. And yet they're all really valuable to Vermont, that I think that we all can appreciate.
Hey, Clarence. Need a packet? Get your,
If it's all right.
yeah, go ahead, yeah, please.
So there was a Penn State report that came out a couple of years ago about the economic value of small schools and how development money really should be pointed or given to small schools because there's a serious economic part of having a school in a community.
Right.
And I just wondered if you wanted to truly a valuable Vermont asset, both economically and, socially and educationally and spiritually, well, you don't have to probably put that one, but, you know what I mean? But there's something really important to the community, and we're losing 1,000 kids a year, and you're gonna close schools, that means that community doesn't offer those jobs, that's not gonna be bringing people into this. I mean, governor wants to lay off teachers, where are those jobs going? Anyway, that's another.
Happy to add that to it, yeah, no problem whatsoever, believe me.
Yeah.
Laura Lee?
There's older research too, from basically the 70s, about the Midwest and when they closed the small schools there, and basically those just became ghost towns. So this is more current research that Lori's talking about, but there's old research too. So I mean, if we're talking about wanting to revitalize our economic
better be talking
systems within the state.
small.
Necessarily closing all the small schools is not
It's not
not the
economically a good idea.
Yeah.
Counterproductive.
Yes.
but I can get you that research too.
That'd be great, yeah.
Neil?
Can I ask a question? And I apologize if it was in the reading material, but it was late when I read it. Can somebody speak to the reason why we're looking at a proposed change at the state level for how these grants are determined?
So the law's already been passed. The legislature decided that small schools grants eligibility is going to change. That happened in 2015. And part of the discussion at that time was that communities were insulated from the true cost of operating these small schools through this subsidy, essentially, from the state. And so it was seen as an incentive to merge, to say, if you do not merge, you risk losing this subsidy. But there was also a lot of, for the reasons that have been articulated, pushback around elimination of the program altogether, that if a school district could demonstrate either geographic isolation or academic excellence and efficiency, then that could be a justification for continuation of the grants. So, but that decision has already been made. The state board's boundaries are the law.
And so what you're looking to do here, Dan, is you want this board to go on record as saying, we don't agree with that facet of the law.
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
The flow chart shows a couple of different paths, one of which is being geographically isolated, and the second one of which is complying with a much more carefully spelled out set of metrics that were presented to the State Board of Ed. So if you look at economic efficiency and educational excellence, there's quite a lot of material on that was put together by the agency for the board to discuss. Whereas geographic isolation was left, no one has, as far as I know, has made any recommendations to the State Board of Ed as to how they should define geographic isolation. So what I hope to do is to get them to
Years ago.
not be as restrictive. For instance, the 30-minute, I think everybody knows, if it is a 30-minute metric, that leaves one town in the state which is geographically isolated, and that just seems a little bit ridiculous to me. Why would you have one? Why not just have none? But the other metrics, also, I would like them not to, because they still have a lot of work to be done on them, I would like the state board to make them so that they are not so restrictive that little by little small schools end up not being able to get these grants. And because you apply on a year-to-year basis, you might lose your grant one year, you might conceivably qualify again the next year. That
Because of
just-
student numbers or
Yeah.
student
You didn't
test
quite
scores.
meet a educational standard or whatever. It just seems so chaotic to try to run a small school like that. We're already driving teachers away, because they don't.
So you're not looking for us to advocate for a change in 46,
No, correct.
just on how they define things within.
Correct, and they have till the end of June, I think the 1st of July, I believe, is the date by which they have to have established these metrics. And, I wish I had been there 4 months ago to be part of the conversation, but better late than never. And because I believe I will be given an opportunity to speak for just a few minutes, I want to try to be as effective as possible.
Thank you, Dan. It is July 1, so it's possible that they will, again, because their agenda is not published, it's not clear whether this is going to be an action item next week or whether they will save it for their June retreat.
Right.
But I know that on the June retreat, they're going to be going through the state plan, the proposed state plan. And remember, the acting secretary is going to be publishing that in a couple weeks.
The acting who's going to be on interim, right?
Yeah.
What are, Flor?
So I agree with what you had said before, taking out that, because this number will go down, so taking out that sentence. Because I think if we wanna validate the importance of however they do those metrics for the small schools grants, it has to be on the merits. So let's say where's the primary objective of doing the action? The only thing I had said before is that how do we compare that to, like the thing is current use right now in Vermont, right? Because we do current use not just to help the farmers, it's also the way that we want Vermont to look, how we bring more people to Vermont. So how do we do, I'm not saying we're gonna go against Act 46, we're just gonna say, you know, as the board, you know, we support, you know, it's part of why education and why people move to Vermont, not necessarily supports consolidation, right? Because we're so it is, it's tricky. So I don't wanna sound against Act 46, but I also wanna say that there's a handful of schools, just like we do with farming, that we preserve that current use, not which is really a subsidy in some ways if you keep the clause.
Don?
I think this is true, but if not, correct me. But a small school could have not merged through no fault of their own or no authority of their own. They could have been in a SU that the majority of the other towns said, we aren't gonna merge. And you had no control over it because the merger didn't happen. So I think, if that's the case, I think that's a really strong point. What you're saying to someone is, you know, whether you wanted to merge or not, that was really not under your control. And now you're basically getting punished for something that the other people in your area. As I said, I want to research to make sure it's true about that. I believe in the supervisory union where I work, the smallest school certainly wasn't in favor of it. But even if they had been, two of the other schools voted no. So that there was nowhere to go unless they take and partner up with another school that's 15, 20 miles away in a different SU. So if that be researched, that might give you some more clout. I also wonder on their statement, the schools that merge will continue to get small school grants, right? If you
They
merge,
converted to merger support grants.
Right.
merger support grant,
Yeah.
but basically,
Until they decide.
so the statement you have here, basically, because they followed what the legislature wanted, they do not have to meet the same standard. And I think that's a real powerful thing. In fact, in some way, I think that's discriminatory in saying, hey, you know what? If you merge, because we want you to merge, or people in your area want to merge, then you're off the hook. You get the money, merger grants, or whatever you want to call them. And is anybody from AOE going to be checking to see if you are working efficiently or improving outcomes? Hopefully, yes, but we all know if we go through it, probably a little shallow. So anyway, just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah.
Other thoughts, comments? Yeah?
One more, I guess the last sentence to me, which is sort of, I think, where you want to end up, right? I'm not familiar enough to know, I mean, that's a rather subjective thing to say, right? What was the old process and how is it different than the proposed? Like, did you have to prove anything at all in the past?
Well, in 2011, somebody came up with a list of geographically isolated towns. I think it's just, you're honored or not.
So, but that was just a report.
Yeah.
The law was, if you have this number of kids, you meet the criteria. There was
So that was
no,
the
Never
criteria.
been
so that sentence is a little problematic, and that's why Gio's question was, are you asking for a change in the law? Because the law says that it is gonna be, I don't know, more difficult, but it's different. Eligibility for the small schools grants will change on July 1, 2019. Some
Okay.
believe that means it's more difficult. The geographic isolation question, or I think where people are feeling like, well, in 2011, it was a long list of districts, and now we're down to one. I think that's, you may want to more directly reference the 2011 report rather than prior law, because the law didn't care about geographic isolation, it cared about the number of students you had.
But that 2011, the schools who were in geographic isolation were quite a few.
Right,
it
and that
wasn't
was just a
millions,
report to
but-
the legislature.
Right.
So the stakes around that report were pretty low, in terms of
Right.
there was no, they didn't do anything with it.
Right. But those, I do know 2 of those towns are located in my SU, and they have always considered themselves, since that has come out, to be geographically isolated. And they mention that.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I don't know, Dan, if that's the point you're making, that that the geographic isolation list should be the same as it was in this, and reference this report, that may
Yeah.
be more.
That's a good idea, reference that specifically, and I would like to address the other metrics as well, so that they don't become so onerous that small schools are hopping back and forth all the time, especially because, like Don points out, if you merged, you wouldn't you know you're gonna get your grant anyway, so, right, it should, that whole last sentence should be more, should be clarified.
I think you could take that last sentence and then start more, I think what we're asking is for clarification. We're not asking for changes, but we are, or you are, however we decide to do it, we're in support of clarifying the process. We understand the value of small schools in Vermont. We want to clarify how you know, those 4 points participate, you know, I don't know how to phrase it, but I think you know where I'm going. We want to clarify what the process is so that it's equitable and that it represents the small school grants. We're not asking for a change. So take that last, we're just in behalf of the small schools. We know that it's part of the fabric of Vermont. You know, we want to support them.
So your idea Dan, would be to go to the meeting on the 1st and read this statement?
I have other things that I'm gonna be saying, which is my own testimony, specifically related to Marlboro, and other small towns in the region around there. So I guess I was thinking, because I only got a few minutes, either read this or hand it out just as testimony to, you know, support the case that I would be making. I could certainly read it if people felt that was more effective. It gobbles up, 45 seconds of my time.
I don't know I don't know what the state of the language is at this point.
Right. Would you be asked to talk at said meeting?
You know, I think I represent the board in those, but you know, if the board wants a different representative, the state board,
Well, it wouldn't.
it's highly possible I'll be caught up in the State House, so.
I guess that
At the
was.
July meeting?
No, I think you're talking about, you're going next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that.
Yes,
But,
yeah.
it'll be on the agenda
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
So how do people feel about Kim? I guess we're putting the cart before the horse. So let's figure out what language we think we can support, and
Right,
then
and
how
that's
to
a little
deliver the
bit what I'm
message.
trying to
Let's do
figure
one
out, 'cause
first.
this is a little bit without specificity, and I've heard you suggest that it was about not making geographic isolation more difficult, and understanding that the criterion for proving academic and otherwise viability at whatever size, you're fine with leaving that, or I just need to understand better what you're
So-
asking for us to support?
Okay, so I have been sort of redrafting this, and I guess I think at this point it might make sense. Are we able now at this point to vote electronically? I could take this home, I could redraft
Right.
it, which I think would take into account the comments that we've heard here and send it back out.
Can you just tell me, Dan, though, are you asking for us to just weigh in on not making geographic isolation any more restrictive than it has been? Because I don't know what that was before, and I'm hearing it's 30 minutes now. And I can think there are probably
There's-
some students at
there's-
CBU or
There's
ethics
talk
that are
of,
traveling 30
there's talk of
minutes,
30
and I'm
minutes.
hearing-
No one's established a
That's
parameter.
correct.
Okay, and we don't know what the parameter was before, it was just a
No,
list.
There
We-
was no
It's never
parameter.
been one.
There's
But
never
there
been
was
a
a
parameter.
list.
There's never been,
It was-
there's never been an official parameter.
So the legislature in Act 153 asked the Agency of Education to identify a list of schools that it would consider to be geographically isolated. And didn't give the agency much guidance around that, and so the agency produced a report. I have the full thing here if you want it. And there's a pretty good list of schools that would qualify. I'm not exactly clear on the specific, 23 schools were identified. It was considered that either the driving times or distances along with the travel route were an obstacle in transporting students. Distances and time shown are from school to school and do not take into account additional distance and times for students to reach their current school. Actual seat time on a school bus could be considerably longer for many students than the times shown in the table. So it was
I
as
guess-
good
If
an analysis
that's
as
all
the agency could do at the
at the
time
time.
with the guidance that was
And we
given.
have
from the
no
legislature.
particular reason to believe that the roadways have changed or anything dramatic has happened in terms of passage for students during that time. We have reason, would it be fair to say that that list would still be potentially a geographically isolated road?
Potentially.
Okay, and I'm hearing you say, Dan, that you just don't want that to have been changed.
Well, I tell you what, Kim, this is what I've just been sort of scratching out here. Because I totally agree that last sentence is pretty vague and subjectivity creeps in there. But sense of the meeting that the board should set metrics for small school support grants for education and efficiency which are no more constrictive than those expected of merging schools, and geographic isolation should at least reference the 2011 report rather than using 30 minutes as the metric. Something like that. So I would like to address them both, I think, Kim, just so that we're...
And I think part of my question, the reason for that question is I do have concern that if you have less than 11 students in a grade level, that is potentially a difficult environment for one kid in a class of, one girl in a class of 8 boys, and where is there a standard at which we're wanting to make sure we're still providing the best opportunities for kids, not holding up something that's not providing the best opportunities for students. And if we're not asking that there be some demonstration that certain metrics are met to say that that's still the best environment for us to be investing state resources in, it would be the type of thing that if you're not merging, you have to provide, right, for an alternative structure or whatever. I mean, there were, I don't know how similar these are to those sort of reports that needed to come to bear. I know when we did our unification, the study committee spent a lot of time on data and looking at each of the schools independently and then the unified potential opportunity altogether, because Westford was at different points has been a small school that was supported by small school grants. So I guess I just, the geographic distance makes sense to me that be preserved in a way. If it made sense before, why is it? I doubt we've paved a bunch of roads that we didn't have paved before. So, but I think the parameters around making sure it's still providing an academic experience that's meeting the standards that make sense if they're, and not providing incentive not to collaborate with our neighboring schools.
Right, and I certainly don't contest that in any way. In fact, one of the things that I have in my own personal comments is that Marlborough School is excited to grapple with these new metrics for educational and efficiency. I think they give us great guidelines. I like the way they're spelled out in there, but I'm leery that the board will make them so difficult to achieve that the smaller schools might not be able to accomplish.
So it might be different than and that's laid out, I guess that's what I'm just trying to
I think we got 2 or 3 things
Yeah.
going here. I apologize for being late, maybe it was already covered, but is the grant, the small schools grant that got converted when you merged as an ESA, there's not a lot of certainty that that's gonna continue right at the moment, is there? Aren't they playing with that? And it wasn't that set up for a limited number of years to begin with, right? Wasn't there a limitation on how long that was gonna go on when we merged? And
I think if the small schools grant is converted to a merger support grant, I don't believe there's a time limit on that.
at the moment.
At the moment, there's a lot that's up in the air. And
That's one, but I'm just wondering if there is a time limitation and they wind up taking those away, then the other piece of the small schools grant that you're fighting for is on the same chopping block. I believe it may be, I believe that was a deal, and a deal's a deal, we should just live with it, but, that doesn't always hold true under the dome.
What do you mean by that? What was the deal?
Isolated, small schools, when Act 60 went in, they wanted the support, they said it was inefficient to run these schools, as inefficient, we're going to give them a break that's called the small schools grant. Like it or not, that was the policy, they've changed the policy now. And we're saying, maybe you shouldn't be so quick to change it.
Okay.
I do question the list they looked at. I looked through some of that stuff. I'll admit I didn't read every word of it, but my associate from Bennington County may vehemently disagree with it, but I can't see where the hell Dorset is an isolated school. How do you figure that? They got Route 7 and Route 30 going through and they come together just down the road. Now you can go over the hill and that might take more than 10 minutes, but come on. Get your head out of it, never mind.
Yeah, easy there, Clarence.
Well, let me tell you, and I appreciate Dan bringing it up, I think it's brought up one tonight. I think we have, in my mind, we have 2 things happening here. I would feel very comfortable if this group supported the motion, that Nicole, and if she couldn't do it because she's still working with the governor, or Gio, would be available to go to a state board meeting and make a fairly brief statement saying that, something to the effect that our committee or whatever, the VSBA, whatever, would encourage the state board to really think this through and not make it more challenging and more difficult for schools, small schools to receive the grant. And that's pretty vague, but it basically says, you know, there are some concerns out there from our members that this could get, some, I really won't say discriminatory, but could become more challenging than it need to be. Let's step back and look at the criteria you're going to use, whether it's the time, the mileage, efficiencies and all that. Let them know there's some concerns on our organization. Separate that from what Dan wants to do, from speaking from Marlboro, and speaking to support that, if he so chooses. I'm a little concerned that if Dan is speaking to other issues, we're really going to cloud the issue. And as a former state board member, knowing a lot of things thrown at you, I'm going to leave there wondering, well, was this the VSBA or was this the Marlboro Wyndham School District? I think your ideas are good, but if there's a way for us as this group to make a statement that basically says, hey, ladies and gentlemen, think this through, take time, I know they were working on it, take time, but don't do anything that's going to make it more challenging for small schools to operate. And then let Dan do his thing. Anyway, just some thoughts.
Laura Lee?
I guess, thinking as a board member, we have to think about our kids first. And, you know, in Danby is one of our schools that I would say it certainly is isolated. We have kids that catch their bus at 6:30 in the morning for an 8 o'clock start time. And if we've got kids who are in small districts that didn't find a partner to merge with, I think remembering that we have to be looking out for our kids is really, that's our first priority. If the state has already created metrics to measure excellence in education, and that is in legislation, correct? That is part of Act 46, the metric?
the requirement that the state
The
board
requirement the state
develop
board
the
create
metric.
the metric, okay.
Yes.
As long as that's there, I think standing behind the kids having a reasonable day, it's our job.
So one concern that I would just like to point out, I'm not opposing this necessarily, but we have, as a board, just recently, I don't know, I'll have to look back in the minutes, but we were pretty adamant a few months ago that so many schools had complied with 46, that we weren't looking to change the rules of 46 at this stage of the game, because that would really disrupt people across the state. So I think we have to we're treading on careful water here, because we don't want to weaken the requirements it takes. What you're saying, I'm just trying to get clarification, Dan, you're saying you think we ought to make a statement saying, don't strengthen it.
Correct, don't make it impossible, essentially.
Okay, but you're not saying weaken it down, make it easier, you're saying don't make it so onerous that no one can get there.
Right.
All right, is that a statement we can give tonight?
Yes.
If Don was making that as a motion for what
Well,
you
I
do
don't
to present something, I would second that. And that leaves the floor open for Dan to deliver whatever point he
Right.
wants about Marlboro without clouding
Clouding-
the issue
clouding
of
it.
coming from us.
Right.
One of you just make the statement that, you know, we don't wanna make it worse, but we don't want Act 46 to go away either.
We don't want to make it more challenging for them to stay in existence, basically.
What do folks think of statements sort of like that Nicole would deliver?
Or you, I believe.
Nicole, you have reservations, I can see it in
Well,
your
no, I
face.
just want to be clear about what it is what the
Yes.
message is that I'm
Right.
delivering. So
What are you hearing?
I'm hearing both from this group and generally around the state, real concern that rural schools and rural communities are threatened. And so it's important that this organization be on the record in support of strong public schools in every community, that every community has access to strong public schools, and that we're not disadvantaging our rural communities by hastening the demise of their public schools in a way that is gonna leave those kids and communities without that resource. So I think I can say sort of a general sense of support for and concern about where we're headed in terms of that. And then, but what I'm less clear about is, so what does that mean with respect to their deliberations around metrics? The law was designed to make it harder to get the small schools grants. So if that's where I'm a little, if I say don't make it any harder, they may say, well, we're just doing what the law is asking us to do. So I think I need more direction.
Right.
I'm not
Neil and
clear.
Dan?
So to that point, was the law designed to make the criteria that you applied to a non-merged small school different than the criteria that would have been applied to a merged small, I think where we're talking about it making it harder is, I think it'd be okay if the criteria were the same. Like, are we expecting the same thing from our non-merged small schools?
So the law viewed it as an incentive, right? So the way it was set up was, this is an incentive for you to move forward because you do not want to lose this grant. If you merge, there's no more criteria. You just get it in perpetuity unless they decide to do something different.
Killing
But-
small grants has been around for a long time.
But right, and so we're talking about districts that did not merge. The legislature intentionally was making it more of there's a bar you have to meet in
But
order to be eligible.
Are we saying that we fear that bar is going to be set at a level that we wouldn't expect from a merged small school, like that?
The merged small schools get, it changes to become a merger support grant.
No, I understand that,
Okay.
but, I mean, wouldn't we still expect, though, that merged small school still needs to do some things right? I mean, they don't get a complete buy on the whole thing, like, they can't, like, not merge and then just tank their program, like, we would still expect them to do well.
But I think, I would just say, in looking at a merged district and having a small school within it, you're now looking at a pre-K-12 system, and you're looking to collaborate on resources to provide opportunities very differently than probably they were able to do when they were looking as a board at their own small school. I mean, at different times, they've had more than 20 kids graduate from a class, and different times less. And so that was a real risk for Westford, that they would no longer have small schools grants eligibility. But I will say, sitting on a board of a unified district, you're really looking at your pre-K-12 system and deploying resources in a way that's supporting kids in all those buildings in a way that finds some equity and best practice among them and sharing that. You were only 1 year into working in this way together, not our board. Our board worked for a year before that and doing budget and doing policies, but administration is working to find proficiencies and deficiencies across the system and deploy resources to support that. So I don't know that, we're not necessarily reporting that out independently for each of them, either to us as a board right this second or to the state for that eligibility, but in our forming articles, we wouldn't close the school for 5 years, and nor would we envision that will even be ever something we do, but we might do like a magnet because they have an amazing outdoor resources there. There's just, it's a very different way of looking at things than it is to say you have to report out from that small school that's getting a merger support grant.
Again, we're cutting up against the clock here. So.
Okay, so I would just, it's just different. So I don't think it's that it's not being considered.
Dan.
Yeah, and let me say too, also to that, Neil, that, you know, in Marlboro, sort of trapped between several supervisory unions, a lot of different towns around us, our kids go tuition to numerous local high schools. We have been talking since the passage of Act 46 way more with all of these different schools, even though we're not part of a K-12 system, about ways in which we can collaborate and make the education for our kids work better, basically. And I don't think that should be eliminated from what the state board passes out as the metrics. But I also don't want the people sitting at the state board to make the bar so high that these little towns are having to jump through hoops to get through it.
So we need to wrap this up and come to some sort of meeting of the minds here. I mean, one thing I can potentially throw out to see if it sticks, given the fact that they were going to strengthen the small schools grants, and that the schools in my area, some of the small schools merged, fearing losing the grants, and that was a conversation around the table. Do we want to, I don't know, have language that says, don't make the bar impossibly high, because they're going to make the bar higher, but there's a difference between making the bar here and making it up here.
Reasonable, but don't make it unreasonable.
Is that where we can find some common language here, and then either Nicole or someone from the VSBA or even potentially me could deliver that message? Nicole, you've been scribbling here.
I have a few thoughts in terms of a statement. So, Vermont's rural schools are increasingly vulnerable due to demographic and fiscal challenges, some of which are often outside their control, or many of which are outside their control. Small schools grants help ensure public schools exist in rural communities, and these schools are often the heart of that community. The VSBA asked that the state board keep in mind that some districts were unable to merge, either due to structure or willing partners. We ask that you establish these metrics with the following goals in mind: equity, fairness, transparency, and predictability in terms of year to year. We're not going to be questioning our viability, and the need to preserve public education in our rural communities.
Dan?
And I'm wondering if you would just add a little bit about the kid on the bus for more than 45 minutes.
I would just say we have kids on the bus for more than 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And we're going like
Oh,
a
we've
few
got-
miles, it's crazy, it's the logistics of getting
We've got
transportation.
kids on the bus for over an hour
Yeah.
easily.
And honestly, that some of.
In the
And
current-
we merged.
would
Oh, yeah.
be going.
Why is it an hour and a
Absolutely.
half?
Absolutely.
Move that statement.
I don't
It's
think
on the
we
bus
want
now.
to.
In the city.
I think
Don?
that's too, it's gonna depend on
Move
a
it.
lot.
Don has moved Nicole's statement.
I'll second.
Those
We
are
got a
high
second
schools.
from Clarence, so any discussion about that? This being something, Laura Lee?
I guess if you were gonna make a comment about sitting in the bus, you would want to differentiate between high school students and elementary. I mean, the idea that you're gonna have a little elementary student sitting on a bus for over an hour, that's crazy. On a one-way trip. The high school students, they do it every morning. But we have one high school.
Yeah, it was even our elementary. I would just say, I think that
But-
it's too, that's gonna create more complication and more than I think is the intent. I think this, I would say I would support that statement, and I think it captures all of what we're talking about without being specific, because again, I think even not the high school kids, it's just because you only have so many buses and there's so many stops and so many schools to hit as you're being dropped off, and kids in snowsuits waiting for those buses to get there. So it would be not a metric I would want them to be proscribing, because when we then try and do budgets around transportation, we would be bound by something unintended, I think. So I think your statement captured.
And any other conversation about this?
I just would say to
Don?
Dan, I think if we go with Nicole's statement, or Nicole, as you also makes, it gives you an opportunity not only to support that, say, but in addition, you know, I've worked with you, I know, you'll find a way to be creative to tie it together. I think that's gonna be more powerful than adding it to the statement you made.
Thank you all, I much appreciate your time.
Any other thoughts? Since we do have a formal motion on the table, we'll take a vote on this. All those in favor of someone from the VSBA, a representative from the VSBA, making a statement such as that at the state board meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? Anybody abstaining? Okay. Dan, thanks for bringing that to our attention. All right, so now we have some summer committees. That sounds like fun, doesn't it? A summer committee, let's join that.
So.
There usually is food involved in the summer committees.
Oh, yeah. So we do not meet as a board in July. We do have our retreat scheduled June 13th, 9 to 3:30-ish.
Do you have a location on
At
that?
Visbit, we're gonna have it at Visbit. So we'll talk about the retreat itself a little bit later, but typically what happens is, the committees will meet in July, because we don't have a board meeting. And the, two committees per our bylaws that have to meet are the Resolutions Committee and the Finance Committee. The Resolutions Committee, and this is really for you all to consider and decide so that you can tell us in June who your rep is going to be. But so each region needs to select one to serve on the Resolutions Committee. And the Vice President chairs the
I
committee.
guess that's me.
So if there's only one of you, sorry. But that typically is one meeting that's been in the past. So it's not as though you're signing up for multiple meetings throughout the month of July. It's a one, few hours long marathon. And then that committee makes a recommendation to the VSBA board. The VSBA board considers the recommendations of the committee, and then it goes to the membership at the annual meeting.
I will say it's kind of in many ways the meat of what we do, the resolutions. So it's you not only look at resolutions from other towns and sometimes make suggested changes to them, as Neil knows.
Thank you.
We can't enforce the changes, but
Yeah.
but we so it can be really interesting work actually, because we're smithing things and it's kind of challenging and fun. So
And we have received one resolution so far from, so we put out the call earlier, and we did receive a gun safety resolution from the Taconic and Green Board.
So I assume we'll be putting out the call multiple times.
Oh, yes.
Because that's the feedback we got last year.
Yep. So think about that, connect with your other regional rep and discuss who will be serving so that you can let us know in June. And then the other committee is the Finance Committee, which is Kim and 2 members of the board. That committee really works on the budget that gets proposed to the board, and that involves dues levels and all sorts of fun stuff. So again, think about whether or not that's something. I would recommend you don't serve on, I mean, you can serve on both committees if you want, certainly, but yeah, if you're not going to be on the resolutions committee, we urge you to consider serving on the finance committee. It's a really important.
What's the time commitment on something like that?
I don't even think.
One meeting.
One meeting.
One or
maybe,
2 meetings.
Materials out
Yeah,
ahead,
but-
typically,
yeah.
maybe a little more time for us, but I think the meeting we were able to do like in an afternoon, I remember when Stuart was
Yes,
doing
I
it.
think it's similar to the resolutions committee, 1 meeting, a couple hours long. And a lot of materials ahead of time, so if you have questions or wanna talk about it, it's, it's a pretty straightforward budget. And because we're in the dues transition phase, we've had a commitment to try to just navigate that transition rather than, but it's still an important and interesting discussion. And role to play. So think about that and be prepared to let us know in June what committee you would like to serve. We'll definitely send you a reminder. And the executive committee is responsible for reviewing the bylaws on an annual basis. So executive committee members, you're not off the hook this summer either. Anybody have any questions about the committees?
I guess the only question I would have is the people that are gonna be on resolutions, what's their preference, early in July or late in July? Because we gotta pick a date when we know who's there.
Right.
People are thinking about doing it. Think about what your preference or end of time of the month is. If you're gonna be gone for the first 2 weeks in July, that wouldn't be a good time to volunteer to be on a committee during the first 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think what would be great is if you could bring your dates that you are available, bring your calendars, and then
Hash something out.
what we could do is at the retreat, set aside 15 minutes for committees to get together and
Or
schedule
sit
their
together at
meetings.
lunch.
Sorry?
Or sit together at
Or
lunch.
sit together at lunch.
Any other thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, June, the retreat, that'd be a good time to do it, get it together.
What's the official deadline of the resolutions to be in?
July 24th.
We have to,
July 17th.
July 17th.
July 17th. So that tells us right there that we can't,
It's gonna be the end of the month.
Right.
it's gonna be the end of the month.
End of the
We're
month.
done.
That question solved.
or, early August.
But I think this year we should definitely have, if at all possible, have these things voted on by the full board in August, at the August meeting.
Yep.
So we can get those out, so boards can start looking at them and deciding. Because a lot of boards are now meeting as an SU, like we did my SU, and talking about them as an SU and coming up with a position, which has never been done before, so.
Right.
Let's give them plenty of time to get that done.
So, just to circle back on the conversation that you all had last month about regional meetings, we looked at the calendar, and our recommendation is that we actually have a webinar on the resolutions that can be accessed by anyone after the August board meeting, so that we're not necessarily relying on the regional meetings as the vehicle to get information out. We can have questions asked, set aside some time at the regional meetings for resolutions discussion if people want to do that, but that we're not saying your only opportunity to get information about these resolutions is at a regional meeting.
That's great.
So does
I
that
think
work
it's-
for
yeah.
you all?
Nod heads on that one, I think that's a great
That
idea.
makes sense.
And that way it can be on our website, so if you
Yeah.
didn't participate, you can just
Yeah.
point people to that.
Yeah.
Um,
All right,
Probably have the chair of the resolutions committee there.
I would think so, I would think so. Any other thoughts before we break for dinner? All right, let's take a half hour for dinner and then, ready to go, Clarence, you need me to get? Legislative updates, that's how's things over across the street?
I heard they were getting done this week.
Well, we had a real love fest yesterday in the Cedar Creek Room. Thanks to those of you who came to the press conference, and to Gio for representing us so well, suit and tie and all.
Yes, I own a suit and tie.
I had to look 3 times at my TV monitor to make sure I knew.
You could certainly understand why I might question that, right?
Maybe it's, in the morning, Nicole sent me a text saying, you are going to wear a suit, right?
I
So you're not the only one who's thinking that.
I had a feeling that Nicole may have had something to do with.
He said he was already on it.
I looked at 3 o'clock news, here's Gio, my God, he's got a tie. It's gonna be good.
I own one tie.
Fearless leader and replacement.
So just a little bit of backstory as to how that came about. I've been working talking pretty regularly with Jeff Fannin from the Vermont NEA about the teacher's health insurance piece, which I will talk to you about in a minute. And he said to me, we're probably going to disagree on this, but there's a lot of things that we don't disagree on, and if we don't start working together, we're going to get our butts kicked. I said, you're right. So I talked to some of our folks in this building about the possibility of doing a press conference, and we all agreed that we needed the NEA with us. And so we reached out and asked whether they'd be willing to sort of set aside the last 5 years and join us and really make it an entirely reasonable ask, which is we can see unfolding before our eyes the exact same thing that happened last year. And what happened last year was decisions got made, political deals got made behind closed doors, and the experts were not in the room to inform that process. And so it was a pretty simple message, but I think it certainly got the attention of some folks in the building, and we got some good news coverage on it. My hope is that the press corps begin asking holding leadership accountable to including local perspectives. So that was the press conference yesterday. Later that day, the governor's office issued an invitation to superintendents and business managers to participate in the conference call, the tele-town hall, on the governor's proposal. And the Superintendent's Association said, we're not going to participate in this unless all the stakeholder groups are invited to participate. So the governor's office then issued the broader invitation. So there is a conference call tomorrow at 2:30 where representatives of the administration are going to explain their plan. The plan uses $58 million of one-time money from a number of different sources, one of which is a $44 million anticipated surplus for FY18, and the other is some tobacco settlement money, and there's some other smaller sources. But there's money on the table to resolve some of the differences. Of course, we have a lot of concerns about continually using one-time funds in terms of setting up this perpetual crisis on an annual basis. So the administration's proposal recognizes the risks associated with using one-time money and unfortunately pre-books a lot of savings that they are anticipating might be generated by the implementation of a few things. Statewide health insurance, task force on ratios, which they attribute to us, but they didn't quite get the details right in terms of the purpose of our task force versus the purpose of their task force. Lowering the excess spending penalty to 110%. The special ed funding formula changes. And so they're claiming that this is really sort of a one-time investment, that if the legislature approves these other longer-term cost-saving initiatives, it'll yield even more savings over time. There's been a lot of questions over the last 2 days about the math in that proposal. Joint Fiscal Office ran numbers and came up with some different calculations. So right now, there's like not even talking about the proposals themselves. It's talking about whether the assumptions are the right assumptions from a fiscal standpoint. So the House Education Committee did see some language on a ratio task force this morning that looked pretty consistent with our resolution. And so the unfortunate thing is that it's being talked about with dollars attached to it. So if they had not done that, if they had just said this is the work that we think is important to do in order to provide school districts with good information about research-based, ratio targets or research-informed ratio targets for different types of schools and accounting for poverty and other factors, I think that's consistent with what we're looking for. What we're not looking for is that work is intended to yield, tens of millions of dollars in savings starting next year when contracts have already been issued in April. So that puts us in a bit of a sticky position, because if it, in isolation, it is our resolution. Other than that, the H911 Conference Committee met today. I was unable to go to that meeting because I was in the Senate Ed Committee, but Jeff Francis went, and his sense was that the Senate may actually go along with the House version of 9/11 and call it a day, and the governor has said he's going to veto. The Senate's version basically eliminated most of 9/11 and increased taxes by 5 cents.
Do you know the names of the people on that conference committee?
I don't. Sue, can you find that? The names of the people on the 9/11 conference committee?
Yes, I have it actually in this document that I just pulled up. So what is left from H911?
In the Senate bill?
No, in the Senate bill just brought us back to a year,
Yeah.
for the most part. But
Yeah.
so
9/11
if the Senate's
was-
now gonna go along with the House version, that's the income tax and the
Yeah,
whole
that's
thing.
the income surcharge, the new Scott Beck,
And it's retroactive on our budgets.
right.
The members of the conference committee are Representative Ansel, Sharp, and Beck, and Senators Cummings, McDonald, and Brock.
Is that McDonald Mark?
Yes.
So again, that was a first conversation. I don't want to say that that's where, that was sort of a report I got from Jeff, not firsthand. I don't know how formal the discussion was at the table. That was just sort of his sense of where things might go. It is not clear to me that the administration and the legislative leaders, I do not believe they're meeting right now. So it appears as though the two sides are pretty far apart. The administration's approach is to have these teletown halls and explain themselves they had one with the business community. So I think it's a good opportunity to hear for yourselves what the proposals are, ask questions, and offer feedback. tomorrow afternoon, but the unfortunate, the missing link is there needs to be a meeting of the minds of the three parties of interest, so the legislative leaders, the administration, and school officials, and I don't see a space for that happening yet. And so there's sort of a predominant school of thought that the legislature will conclude its business this week, and then not schedule a veto session, and leave it to the governor to call a special session of the legislature, in which case they can talk about more than just the bills that have been vetoed. There's a lot of one-time money on the table right now. So that, on the one hand, could make it easier to resolve this, but I think it also creates a lot of problems on our end.
So if they were to do that, this may never come out of conference, or will it come out of conference maybe before?
So if they adjourn, they will have adjourned passing the budget bill. The budget committee, the conference committee, the conferees are meeting, they're trying to come to an agreement between the House and the Senate on a budget. It looks like the 9/11 conference committee is gonna meet, and they're gonna come to some kind of an agreement, and, so they'll pass those bills, and then the governor will veto them.
And he'll veto it because, H9/11, he would veto because is it the income tax he's objecting to, or all of it?
I think it's the income tax he's objecting to, but I think it's also the excess tax capacity that gets created in the lower spending districts.
There's no cost containment in that bill, so that,
No, I mean, they,
doesn't speak to
yes. There is an extremely high likelihood that they will have to revisit that formula in 2 years.
And they
Because
cut
there's
back
no-
the funding system and make it apply retroactively in an unsustainable model. Good on that one, I hope he does.
Did anyone see the WCAX news last night on the press conference?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think they gave it fair treatment.
You didn't, or you did?
I did not. Saying that this is typical backroom deals or typical, when Roger Garrity came out and Goswami or whatever his name is, saying, well, it's almost like, this is the way I saw it, it's almost like, why are they talking about this? This is typical politics.
Yeah, but I thought Neil Goswami did a nice job speaking on our behalf, responding to that. Like, yes, and these people are concerned because they don't know what they're doing.
It's the timing, and he's right, the backroom deals, but the timing. You don't wait until the last week to throw things at it.
Right, right. So, unfortunately, it's a similar dynamic in that the governor, the governor's being accused of putting something on the table at the last minute, and it's being largely ignored by the legislature, and they're pointed towards concluding, and they passed a minimum wage bill yesterday, they passed a paid family leave bill yesterday. I mean, it appears as though they are getting passing bills they know the governor is going to veto, and that doesn't seem to be stopping them. So, and we're headed to an election. So at the same time as I do believe there's a fair amount of interest on the part of the General Assembly to conclude the session so that they can then pivot to campaign mode, those of them that are running for re-election. So, but it's really, really difficult to ascertain exactly how it's going to play out. I think, a reasonable compromise is you raise taxes to reflect the level of spending that we saw. Plus, I think you could raise the homestead rate in particular to where it was 2 years ago, and that would be higher than you would need to, given 1.8 increase in ed spending. but that would mean it's highly unlikely that no one-time money will be used. I mean, I just don't see that happening, so my goal is to try to convey to folks, it should be as little one-time money as possible, and we should continue to keep our eye on the longer term work that is being set up, both that has been set up through 46 and other laws, and that is on deck this session. But and I hope that yesterday's press conference opens the door to being included in those conversations. But they need to start talking before we can be brought in.
It did get people's attention when, as Nicole pointed out, we were sitting in the State House cafeteria with the NEA people, and you could see people looking, going, what the hell's going on?
What world are we in?
And they're laughing, and they're talking.
Yeah.
There's something wrong.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because that's happening on a lot of different fronts. I'm with the independent schools lobbyists, and people are like, what's happening here? So, I think they set it up at the CX speaks, politics makes strange bedfellows, so that can be true.
But if nothing else comes of this, maybe we can reach some common ground and bust it open a door, and when have common ground with the NEA, that we can come together with them.
Yeah.
Because it makes no sense to be in opposition with them when we see things, so many things eye to eye. So
Right.
we're hoping that if nothing else, we laid some seeds there.
Yep.
I appreciate that completely, because I've always felt as if we needed to collaborate to educate our children somehow, so rather than be confrontational.
I think
Appreciate
previous executive directors, or whatever Fannon's title is, of the NEA were uncooperative.
They were headbutters.
And I think Fannon's a little more cooperative. Is that?
We're also in a
A lot of jobs are on the line, a lot of members' jobs are on the line.
Yeah.
And
funding
our
issues
students-
tend to bring the organizations together historically. So throughout the entire Douglas administration, we worked very, very closely with the NEA. So it was less about who the personalities are, although that, can play a factor at times, but more about sort of the issues of the day, sort of, aligning you or not. So, I don't have a great report in terms of even seeking feedback at this point, because I don't have any real sense of where this is going, although, I think we have been pretty consistent that reliance on one-time funding is not good fiscal policy and sets us up. The talking point we were working on yesterday was like this perpetual crisis mode of moving from one year to another, where we're like, oh my goodness, now we have to, do this other drastic thing to make up for what we did last year. So that's going to be my message, and I really do hope that some of you can participate in the conference call tomorrow and provide your feedback on that.
The details, the phone number and.
So what I need from you all is confirmation that you want to participate, and then I'm supposed to send them the list of people and their contact information, and they're supposed to email you the calling information. 2:30 conference call.
So related to 9/11, is it your recommendation that right now that we hold tight, that we don't?
Yes, because it's not clear to me what,
But then is the reality, but then we're only talking about 48 hours left in the session?
the reality is H9/11 is not going to become law because the governor is not going to support 9/11. So I'm not sure, what it does to get people on the horn on 9/11. But I'm happy, frankly, I don't know what they're gonna do on 9/11. They've had one meeting as a conference committee. So they've got two choices. They could try to blend the two bills, or they're, pick one or the other. One raises taxes 5 cents, the other has an income tax surcharge and lowers everybody's property taxes. and I tried to figure out, is it 48 hours, is it
And-
next week, what's
Right.
happening, and
And then
nobody's got a straight
whatever-
answer.
So whatever gets passed, does that have a tendency then to set some base thing at which they then begin discussions in a veto session, or do things roll back?
Well, that's why I think they're not scheduling a veto session. They're gonna put it on the governor to schedule a special session, in which case you don't use those, you're not confined to the bills that have been vetoed.
They could crack.
This is all rather new to me.
Yeah,
good
I
sh-
think that was on VPR this evening, there was a discussion on that, special versus veto session.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do I have it right?
Special,
Yeah.
special,
That's exactly what they said.
it gives the legislature an advantage, special session.
Yeah. So, again, because things are not really it's not being done in a super straightforward manner, but, you know, we can let people know once we have a sense of what the conference committee is going to do. Certainly, people can weigh in before the House and Senate vote. I do believe it's gonna be a rapid process. Once they make decisions, they may be still trying to keep the door open for a negotiation with the governor. Once that door closes, they're gonna make decisions and get out of there. And it's gonna be hard for us to. So that's funding. Statewide school employees' health insurance. The Senate Education Committee has spent the last 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks maybe even, working on a bill that has evolved from eliminating VHI entirely and creating a new entity that would both manage insurance and negotiate cost-sharing agreements. That was the NEA's original proposal. To what they voted on today, it was a straw poll, so it wasn't an official vote, because they're actually not moving that language along, because they want to hold it for negotiations with the governor. But the bill that the language that they approved took a lot of work on the part of me and Jeff Fannin to hash out a lot of stuff. But it would establish a commission that negotiates health insurance at the state level for school employees, licensed and non-licensed employees. There's a very clear structure for the negotiations to take place, and then dates in which impasse procedures are triggered. If the parties can't resolve their differences through mediated fact-finding, then it goes to arbitration. And the arbitrator's decision is final and binding. Which is, I believe, very motivating to the parties to settle. If the parties settle, then both the employee association and the employer association have to develop procedures for ratification. So, the way the language is written now, the VSBA would appoint 5 people to negotiate on the commission. It's a 6-year term on the commission. If someone.
Death sentence.
Yeah. Which at first I was like, that's crazy! But then I was like, well, it's actually, you could probably get 2 contracts in that
Right.
period. It's good to have some
You need that experience.
some continuity. If you step off the commission, we appoint a replace. It's not like you're never allowed to get off. But there's no sort of restrictions on who we could appoint and not appoint. So we could appoint, a labor attorney, a business manager, a couple school board members, and sort of a good team. And the union side would be 4 NEA reps and 1 AFSCME rep. And so each organization is responsible for developing their own ratification procedures. So that's some work that we would need to do.
Did they decide to stay away from the labor board?
Yes. The labor board is not involved here. So that's why it goes to arbitration. There are standards in the language for arbitration, for the arbitrators. I'm not sure that they're as strong as we would like, but they do provide some guidance to the, looking at the ed fund, looking at, taxpayers' ability to pay. There's some language in there that is useful. I think it's possible we could work to strengthen it, assuming it moves forward. But, so the ideal is the parties agree, and they're ratified. If ratification fails, then you pick back up in the process, unless you've come up against the deadline, in which case then it just goes directly to arbitration. So, and there are two sets of deadlines. One is the first round of negotiations, which need to happen like immediately after the session is over. Moving forward, it's a more drawn, there's more breathing room for the process, but it's intended to conclude the process in the fall so that local negotiations can proceed knowing what the cost sharing is around health insurance.
Still do support staff and teachers come together?
So today we got agreement to have language in there that says for the first agreement, they do not have to be on the same benefit, so the parties can decide to put people on the same benefit, but there's no requirement that they do so, and the arbitrator is not required to find a single benefit. So there's concerns about, because there's disparate benefit levels for support staff versus teachers, that an easier approach for people the first round is to try and get the individual groups on the same plan and then map out how a transition to a unified plan would work. So this allows for that. There's a minimum duration of the health benefit of 2 years, but it also, again, allows the parties to negotiate a longer term agreement. The other piece of the bill makes changes to the VHI board. So we have moved from language that had a 50-50 board, 3 reps, 3 NEA reps and 3 VSBA reps. That had all kinds of conditions on the reps that VSBA was allowed to appoint, but no conditions on the NEA. To, worked very, very hard, like a lot of different ways, and some of you, I think, got an email from me asking to reach out to committee members on this issue. It was very apparent that the committee was supporting the union's request to restore balance to the VHI board. That's their term for it. It is difficult to counter the argument that for 20 years this organization functioned with a balanced board, without airing a lot of dirty laundry that frankly no one wants to hear about. So I really focused on, you should not have employees of advocacy organizations serving on the board of an insurance trust, because whose interests are they representing at that table? And so we have an agreement with the union today, and the Senate Ed Committee incorporated it into the language that they approved, that the organizations can appoint the members on the VHI board, but they cannot be employees of those organizations. So it's a bit of a bitter pill, I think for some people who think that that's a, you know, an intrusion into decisions that were made by school boards around, and you know, it is an intermunicipal insurance trust. School districts do hold the risk for decisions that are made by this board, but I do feel some comfort knowing that we cannot have paid employees, particularly when those employees are paid by the organization that they're on the board for, that was extraordinarily problematic. So, you know, I was clear, VHI was clear with the committee today, and the Department of Financial Regulation, that we don't support about a 3-3 board. We're gonna still reserve the right to make the case throughout the process that it should be district, you know, a 4-3 board or whatever. But that if it's gonna be a balanced board, this is a scenario that we could live with. But everything else about VHI stays the same. The NEA had wanted to move to a single plan, sort of immediately. And the language says that VHI has to maintain the current slate of plans, at least through the duration of the first agreement. So, so we got a lot of concerns addressed. It's not perfect. And I know there are some people who think statewide bargaining is a bad idea. But I felt a fair amount of emotion sitting in that room because it's a big deal. And it's the starting point, so who knows where it's going to go this session. I'm hopeful it can get improved as it goes along even more. But for a piece of legislation that big to come out of the committee with a unanimous, even though it was a straw vote, I think reflects a huge, certainly shift in thinking around this issue. Really, in large part because the NEA changed their position, but also because legislators took the time to learn and
So Nicole, does that mean you could not be part of that team negotiating? It could be-
I can be on the negotiating team. I can't be on the VHI board.
Can't be on the VHI
Fine
board.
with me. We've got 3 great people on the VHI board right now. Like, the only reason that I believe that the members took the action that they took to have a seat, a VSBA seat on the board, was because our 3 members were not there with collective bargaining angles in mind. You know, it was like, we're talking about insurance products here, and unfortunately, you know, not unfortunately, but the NEA was there with all those pieces in mind, and they needed the balance. So I think it's a good outcome for everyone that the collective bargaining piece is now gonna happen over here, so that the insurance piece can happen over here. And I think it lowers the stakes around some of the decisions being made by the VHI board, because the stakes are over here with the negotiations.
So will VSA have anybody on the VHI board or the business managers?
We get to appoint 3
Okay,
members.
we get to play 3 members.
I see no reason to change our 3 members at this point, but.
Kim?
One of the parting words that the chair had when we were in the Senate that day was that he wasn't sure if it was going to go anywhere because of everything else that was floating around this. Do you have some sense that this is moving unanimously? It could pass on its own outside of the context of all the other things that the governor's going to put forth?
It's not going to pass on its own, so the committee was very clear today. We have a great piece of legislation right here that I'm gonna put in my back pocket that I have for negotiations with the governor.
Okay.
Because the governor
Because
wants it.
this one's
Because
good
the
to
governor
go.
wants us, the
Governor
last
wants
thing they
it
wanna do is pass this,
because then-
and then the governor signs it into law, thank you very much, now we're gonna go back to negotiations, and you've got one less chip in your mouth.
Yeah,
No.
got it.
So,
But it's not for the fact that it's gonna be bounced back and forth between House and Senate or committee and then.
no, and in fact, I checked in with Dave Sharp today and said, where are you got, you know,
Yeah.
Senate Ed's been, they're down a road on this thing, you know, and he was like, whatever they come up with. You know, so they're not gonna, they're getting out of there, that's where they're focused on, so, yeah,
Should say that we had 3 board members testify,
yes, we did.
so.
Thank you very much
Yeah.
to Adrienne, Neil, and Kim.
Yeah.
I think that was, it was a big help. And, you know, I have to say, I thought the Senate Ed Committee did a really good job of, you know, treating it with the seriousness with which it needed to be treated, and I think we came up with a far better outcome than had it been sort of cooked up, again, behind closed doors in the last, as part of a final negotiation. So I feel good about the fact that at least going into the negotiation, we have something that I can say to the governor's office, do not mess with, like, this is good stuff. There's some things, you know, if you wanna hold the line on a couple issues, that's fine, but generally speaking.
And the NEA's in that part, right? And the committee.
Right, right, right,
Yeah, considering where we started from, we're in a pretty good place.
yeah. Yeah, I'm not gonna be bitter about how poorly I was treated over this issue,
Oh.
you know, from the personal attacks, but to now have
Oh,
it be
that's
like,
all
oh, this is a
water
great
under the
idea. You know? But it was a big moment for me personally today to see that come to pass, because it was,
Do you know how much they think?
turns out it was a pretty good idea. What?
Do you know how much they're expecting in their assumed savings to come out of healthcare? Because I think we probably all know that that's not likely to happen now that we missed the boat when the plans were changing.
Right, so the, one of the issues that Joint Fiscal Office identified with the governor's numbers was overestimation of savings. So first of all, the governor's proposal is to set a benefit in statute for 3 years, and then have another study committee look at how to negotiate, and I said to them, like, we've just figured it out in the Senate Ed Committee. Like, please don't make me do this again. Like, it's been figured out, we know how to do it. So, you know, I think there's some, it's not crazy to talk about setting the benefit in statute, given the tight time frame that we're up against. I mean, Jeff Fannin and I spent about 2 hours yesterday trying to figure out, like, is there any way we could get out of having to start bargaining in July or August? And the fact is, there really isn't any other way. But even if you, because we do not have the information we need in order to even recommend what a benefit would look like in statute. It's just, it's too difficult to do, and there's too much risk associated with getting it wrong, and then. So they booked a lot of savings though, based on this benefit in statute that we're not. So I think it's really important to focus on what are the parameters you're giving the parties when they negotiate, which is why I think the standards for fact finders and arbitrators are really important.
Neil?
Do we know if this new commission, are those meetings non-meetings?
The language does not reference negotiations. It creates a commission. I don't know what it
Commission
is.
meetings public, people come to the.
Don't commissions negotiate.
We'll see. So, yeah, I'll skip over pre-K.
I think, Nicole, I think it's an absolute miracle that in 24 months or so ago that we sat in a room and brainstormed that idea.
Thanks
And
to you.
it's this close. If somebody had said that that was gonna happen that quick, never would have believed it. I mean, it's not a done deal, but this is a major piece of accomplishment that we've got through between resolution and everything else, and working with the other side to never would have happened if we hadn't got together with the NEA. But hopefully this can expedite a lot of negotiation
Right.
problems.
And have people at the local levels focus on things that they are the experts in. And so maybe some other benefits will accrue that way. So special education funding and special education in independent schools. This was another deal that got worked out. So there was a lot of concern about how independent schools were going to be incorporated into the new census-based block model funding system, and also concerns about the requirement that public school systems provide staffing to private schools for 9 months. I was sitting next to the private school lobbyist, and we were both sort of had our heads in our hands like, this is not gonna, it's not workable, and so we just sort of started spitballing some ideas, and we came up with a compromise that is gonna pass. This is the only bill that's actually done. So the compromise is the advisory group on the census-based block, I can't remember, census block grant model, I think is how it's called, is tasked with bringing back to the legislature a recommendation for how independent schools will, I don't even know if it needs to go back to the legislature or if it's agency rules, but anyway, how independent schools will be having to play by the same rules as the public schools, basically. Once we move to this new funding model, it was a concern that was raised very articulately by the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union. And so recognize that that's a problem. There's a process in place to address that and be very clear that we will all be playing by the same set of rules. In terms of independent schools that currently do not serve students eligible for special education, the deal there is the requirement that they do so is delayed by 4 years. During that time period, a few things are happening. One, we're figuring out how the funding is going to work. Two, the standards board is doing a review of the special ed endorsement to ensure that the licensing process is not impeding folks from obtaining that endorsement. So one of the concerns we've heard is that is a barrier. Globally, the big concern here is if we have more schools that need special educators and we already have a statewide shortage of special educators, are we placing more pressure on the system? So part of the deal is to figure out at the state level how we can support or how we can address the shortage of special educators. So that's one piece of work that's happening. Another piece of work that's happening is what is the approval process for a school, an independent school, to demonstrate to the agency that they can serve kids with special needs. Right now, it's this like 13 category approval process, which public schools don't have to do and takes time and is very cumbersome. So what is the sort of the minimum level of criteria or whatever that you need to demonstrate that to the agency in order to be eligible to serve special ed kids. And then in the event a student, but the basic requirement remains, although it gets delayed a bit, is that if an independent school wants to accept public dollars, then it has to demonstrate knowledge of special ed law. It has to have on staff a special educator or be contracting with a special educator. And it has to be prepared to, if a student wants to attend, that they'll work with the LEA to find a qualified staff person, but that staff person is the employee of the independent school. If through good faith efforts they're not able to identify staff, then and the parties agree that for this child's disability there's just not a person with this expertise that can be hired in this school, and that a different placement is more appropriate. There's language in there that says that the private school is protected from losing their approval status, And the LEA is protected from a parent having like a private right of action that, you know, you have to place my kid in this setting. If the parties have a dispute over whether or not you can actually find qualified staff, then there's a process where they have to go to a hearing officer, and the hearing officer will make that determination. So, the House put that amendment into the bill, and it was approved today on a voice vote, and the Senate Education Committee this morning agreed to concur with that amendment. So that bill is, so that's done. And I believe, while it's, you know, again, difficult to think about delaying addressing civil rights for 4 years, I think this does so in a way that doesn't put the burden for doing that squarely on the public system. It recognizes that each side has legitimate concerns, and we need to work together over the next few years to figure out how to make it work.
So this is something we've been working on for 6 or 7 years, so another,
More.
yeah, another huge accomplishment. So it's, again, not perfect, but, you know, a huge step forward, Laura Lee.
So it feels like a big win for us.
Yeah, yes.
Because as an LEA, we've been dealing with so much with all independent high schools. Is it feel that way for the other districts and people who have, you know, more of a public K-12?
I started this ball rolling how many years ago? So
So-
yes,
so
it
it
feels
does?
good to me.
Okay.
Don remembers, I was there in the
It's
Senate
been around at least for a
chambers.
decade. At least a decade.
Gosh.
So I've been personally working on
And
this
in
for a
the
long
beginning, the
time.
other party would not move at all. They would not give anything. All they spent their time is justifying their current
Yep,
position.
there was no problems. So,
Awesome.
this is huge.
I'm gonna say a couple things. So, there's some school safety grants, and there's been a committee set up to decide what the RFP process is for the school safety grants, $25,000 apiece. I've asked VSBA to be our rep on that committee because they know a lot more about school safety. They did a lot of school safety assessments. So they are at the table for that discussion, but we expect that once the session concludes and the money's been booked, that information about the RFP is going to go out. It's intended to provide money for capital investments, so locks and windows and the like. I will let you know, during this meeting, I got an email that was really frustrating, that the budget conferees have received language from the treasurer's office that they have agreed to put in the budget that would increase, so I remember the deal that was made on retired teachers' health benefits a few years ago that had a $1,000 assessment for every new hire. So I don't know why we haven't heard about this at all this session and why it's coming up in the 11th hour, but the treasurer is recommending that be increased by $275 per hire, and that it be, basically that amount be indexed so that it increases. I can't remember if it's annually or probably is annually. So that's, I need to get more information about why this is just
Hopefully it's
coming out.
not impacting the people we're hiring right now with the budget we built.
Oh, what? I don't know what the timing is of it. It's certainly not great timing that it's happening
Retroactively 5 years.
in May, on May 9th, and we've not heard a peep about it. The $1,000 assessment came about as a result of months of meetings and negotiations. $275 on $1,000 is not an insignificant increase.
It's not for us.
So I'm gonna find out what that's
Can you shoot us an email
about.
once you find out? I'd love to call Ben Beth's ear for making that ridiculous.
Yes, I think I'm going to send out something to everybody,
A
saying
number
that.
of us worked hard to get her elected, because she came, she used to testify on Jeb's behalf and did a very good job. as far as a political person, she had no political skills at all, as far as running as a candidate, people were told.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a great treasurer, and she's done a good job. I'm concerned about the lateness of the proposal and why it wasn't sent to me, why it was sent to the superintendents. But it's been now passed on to me and the business managers, so we'll circle the wagons tomorrow and figure out what to do. That's it for me from now. The pre-K stuff is just, it's very unclear where that's going. The House Education Committee really did a great job responding to our concerns, put together an amendment that they unanimously supported, ran into a lot of resistance in the House Human Services Committee, that it would disadvantage somehow the private providers. So now I'm still not clear on what happened. It also ran into trouble today in the Appropriations Committee. So that, the dispute between, it is this ongoing CDD versus AOE, public versus private, really is now in the Speaker's office where she's trying to rein it in and make a decision. But the Senate Ed Committee today said he doesn't even think they're going to get the miscellaneous ed bill. So it may be that the whole bill dies.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's got a lot of
Laura Lee?
stuff.
It's got a lot of stuff in it. I'm actually, that's okay.
No, but some little cleanup stuff has been very impactful.
Right,
That
right.
is
So you need to work with Dylan to get that in somewhere else.
Laura Lee?
Or,
And then we need to move
I
on.
don't know what's happening with it. But it's been a bit of a train wreck because of pre-K.
So one of the things, and I don't, was it in the miscellaneous probably, was the, someone had brought up limiting, paying out-of-state tuitions. Or removing the requirement.
Yes, that was in the miscellaneous.
It is in the
bill.
miscellaneous.
Yeah.
We really want that.
Yeah, there's some stuff, everybody likes a little bit of what's in the miscellaneous ed bill. But none of it is, from their point of view, must pass.
Right.
So,
Floor,
who knows?
Floor, and then we gotta
I
move
just
on.
have a clarification question, just because I don't know anything about this. It's, you said 275 annually extra for, is it new hire, retired person?
New hire, and that's on an annual basis.
Okay.
All right, so innovation zones, this is something that Dan brought up, and he's got an idea around this, just so everybody's got a little bit of a background. We passed a resolution last year as a possible cost containment measure. We thought that innovation zones where we might allow schools to do things that are a little different. So Dan, your floor.
Well, I think, given the seriousness of a lot of the other stuff that we've got going here, I think if a couple of people are interested in this, what I would like to propose, the one I've been thinking about is specifically related to teacher licensure. We just hired a teacher. We had wonderful applicants who were in the process of trying to go through peer review. Peer review was so slow that we couldn't even see the end game on it. And I would like to think that we might create innovation zones whereby work with agency or whoever else would be the appropriate people to say, we want to get working teachers the ability to advance themselves without having to go back to school, speed up peer review, would mean some more flexibility. That's what I think it would mean probably.
So
That's my own specific one, but I'd be happy to work as a kind of a committee with other people if you have other ideas.
Yeah, and how you explained this to me, Dan, is you didn't have that specific idea. You said, you're suggesting that we sort of form a subcommittee, tell me if I'm wrong here, and that subcommittee would look at what possible innovation we may come up with to propose
Exactly.
to the legislature.
And I just wanted to flesh that one out a little bit.
As an example of one of those.
Really been forefront.
So, but to be clear, if we're gonna talk about this as a subcommittee, I think we're not coming in necessarily with that's the idea we're gonna work on, but that could be an idea that the subcommittee would work on.
Perfect.
So my only thoughts around that is this is be a little different for us to do this, because I don't know, it probably would make sense if the legislature was actively saying, wow, yeah, we're interested, what kind of ideas do you have? So given that, have you talked much about innovation zones to them? Is there any interest in that, if you have talked to them?
I have not talked about innovation zones, we have talked a lot about, well, not me specifically, but there've been a lot of committee discussions around licensure. And so I don't know if it's I think it might be in the miscellaneous bill, that they have asked the standards board to conduct a thorough review of the entire, so it's the standards board for professional educators that regulates the profession. And there's a lot to that, and so they've asked, the General Assembly's asked them to do a review. And I don't remember exactly what the language says in terms of what they should be looking for, but there's about 4 different bills that are asking the standards board to do a review.
But that's just with that particular
That's
issue,
with
but
that
what about
particular
the
issue.
general
Innovation
concept
zones.
of innovation zones?
I have not pushed innovation zones this session because I thought our goal, and the way we talked about it in the resolutions context was, this was something that we had discussed with the Superintendent's Association, and that we would sort of reboot the conversation with them around barriers that each group sees. And then before we go to the legislature and say, if only we didn't have these things, we could be more innovative, that we actually need to do a little work on our end to say, what are those things, those regulations that we want to have relief from.
And I think that's what Dan's talking about.
Right, and so, I think if there's a group here that wants to meet, I would, wanna let, the Superintendent's Association know that that's what we're doing and invite them to have some people do the same.
That was my question.
But I also have to say that, we are on like 7 different task force. I mean, if the bills that are in play in the legislature pass, it's gonna be a very busy, summer in terms of the task forces that we're all being asked to serve on. So just ask that you be mindful a little bit of that, but, also think it's worthwhile to move the conversation along.
Dan?
I see it as a long-range proposition. Maybe over the course of the summer, we identify 2 or 3 things, we flesh them out a little bit, and then next year, we're ready to go to the legislature with them. But if we aren't proactive on this, it ain't ever gonna happen either, we know that too. So.
Right, that's true.
Lily?
So for me, I understand the licensure thing. I also see a lot of roadblocks with that idea, but there's a lot of other areas that could be opened up with the idea of having an innovation zone. I
That's
also
a
see it as a
volunteer, isn't it?
lot of,
You-
oh yeah, this is something I'm absolutely passionate about, so.
Great.
Shall we work together on that? Other people?
What do other people think? Is this, should we set up a subcommittee to do this? I'm not, I'm seeing a general nodding of heads, I'm not seeing any shaking of heads.
Flora's
Alright.
shaking her head a lot.
Yeah?
So another volunteer, is that what?
No, I'm ready.
So we know Dan's on board, there's no way you're getting out of this
I'm on
one.
for it, yeah, I'll help coordinate.
So anybody else interested in this? Be part of this?
Me.
Laura Lee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Is that a yes, Neil?
No, gosh, no.
Neil, you did,
That was in-
I'm like an auctioneer, you
That
know,
was an
anytime you do
inappropriate
something,
gesture
I'm
on my
like.
part.
All right, so we can also put something out to those members who aren't here.
Yeah.
Put something out to see if they're interested.
And
And then-
superintendents as
And I
well.
Well, the next
yeah.
step is we need to make that
Superintendent,
linkage between the
assistant
superintendents. So, Nicole, I assume you'll go talk to Jeff
Yeah.
and she'll have Jeff figure out what they wanna do on their end.
Right.
So it may be a while before this is set up, but a month or so.
Yep,
That's fine.
and we can check back in about it. And
So will you put out an email to the members?
I'm gonna do it for all the committees and say,
Okay.
we've got resolutions,
Excellent.
finance, and now innovation.
Okay. Any other thoughts about that before we move on? Alrighty,
My brakes started to fail as I came driving in, so I'm gonna hit the road. Thanks.
Oh my gosh.
wait, so this is a good idea, so you're gonna drive the rest of the way home?
I'd rather hit, a phone pole when it's light than when it's dark. So.
Oh my gosh.
If we read about you in the paper tomorrow, Dan, we're gonna be upset.
Last email when you get home. We'll take it.
Hey,
I'll be followed shortly by a
hey,
you are.
Dan, the committee ceases to exist if you're dead.
No worries, definitely picking up the slack.
Did you just elect?
Alright,
Thanks.
well, good luck on that drive home.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Executive Director Evaluation Process, so,
We get to do my report first.
no, I thought that was, oh, right.
I don't mind. I just have a few things.
Let me put on my reading glasses here, so, oh, yes.
I just have a few things. Wanted to make sure you all saw the flyer for the Principals Association event, Building a Culture of Equity. We worked with them a little bit on the concept and the agenda. Not really so much the agenda, but sort of the purpose. So want to invite you all to share that information and consider attending if that's of interest to you. Don't forget, we also have board chair superintendent training the week before on May 23rd. Also not this coming Saturday, May 19th, the NEA is holding a rally for public education. I believe it's on the State House lawn, but I'm expecting information about that tomorrow, like an email version that I can then send out to folks. They are welcoming one or two school board members to speak at the event. So if you have an interest in polishing or honing your public speaking skills and want to speak, I think it's being billed as a support for public education event. I do think there may be some political tones to it, so I wouldn't want anyone to represent the VSBA in case it turns into, an anti-Governor Scott rally, but because we can't be partisan or political in that way, but certainly if you have an interest in speaking in support of public schools, that type of event, I think they would welcome school board voices. Susan, could you say a few words about the Nellie Mae RFP in terms of how many applications we got and timeline, et cetera?
Sure, we received 10 applications, I think half and half from districts that qualify for the Nellie Mae economic standards, and we're almost completely formed a committee that will be evaluating those and narrowing it down to 3. That announcement will be made by June 1st, probably that week before.
So I think we got that's a good number of applications. I'm pretty excited about the interest that was generated. We had good turnout at the full day event in April.
Right, there were about 45, mostly school board members.
It was a good event.
I thought so. It was a great introduction for those who had not already experienced that on the whole topic of community engagement, put in context specifically around schools, and sort of touching on the 101 applications to whet people's appetites. And I believe, despite the fact that it was snowing, a lot of people did use that as the last kick to get those applications in.
Yeah. Many of the districts that attended that day
Have applied. Correct.
So thank you to you, Susan, for that work. Anybody have any questions on the strategic plan monitoring report?
For those of you who are newer to the board, this is basically the way the staff checks in with us as to what they're doing. So if you have any questions about anything you saw on that, that's the grid pattern thing in your packet. Anything else there, Nicole?
That's it.
Can I move on now?
You can move
Thank
on,
you.
please.
I'm trying to catch up lost time here. It is our time to evaluate our executive director again. Last year what we did is we passed out a form, and it asked things like, does your executive director communicate effectively and respectively with VSBA board members? And you said rarely or up to always, a 1 through 5. I'll pass this around real quick. We did not make copies. And then what we did last year is people either electronically submitted this to me, or you can mail it to me or hand it to me at the June retreat. And then I'll tabulate it, put the comments together. What we did then is the executive committee meets, we look at this and we come up with a more formal evaluation and goals or whatever we wanted to do. And then I present that to Nicole. So if that seems like a process we could follow again, we'll do that. If anybody has any thoughts about that, this would be a good time to share them.
Did Nicole find it worthwhile?
Yes. This would be the 3rd year, I think we've used that tool.
I think it is the 3rd year.
If it's valuable, we should do it that way then.
So what you'll see coming from me at some point is, hopefully shortly, is the job description of the executive director as well as the evaluation form. And again, you 2 methods. You can send it to me electronically, then obviously I know who you are, so if you want to send me an unmarked letter, as to don't know where it came from, you'll have to drive to a different post office. Or you can just hand it to me at the June meeting.
Or we can have like a box at the
Yeah,
June
yeah,
meeting.
yeah. I'll
Just put it in.
Have someone else hand it to you.
That's right.
Oh, I didn't know Amy felt that way.
So we were hoping to have this done ahead of time, but Nicole's on a 2-year contract, so so next year you'll see this cycle through like a month
Earlier.
faster than this. But for this year we're okay because she's on a 2-year contract. So. Any questions about that?
Last year, we had a second evaluation at the same time for something, right? There was 2 of them we filled out.
Evaluation of the
Oh,
board.
yourself.
Oh, self-evaluation.
Yourself.
Thank you, Clarence, for remembering
Well,
that.
I just recall the slight confusion of people that dealt with that one first before they dealt with this one. Because the initials in there, they just started out for ED. They didn't specify what ED was. Left the mind to run wild. When you got to this one, it says.
Who's Ed?
Well, it was a couple other people, the board members that brought it up, and I said, yeah. You had to get to the 3rd or 4th question before you go, oh, they're talking about the executive director. Oh, that's all right,
So let's do.
All right, so we will put down what the ED is on this one.
On this one is fine. If you're gonna do the other one at the same time, make sure that abbreviation gets qualified. Would be nice.
Would folks like to do a board self-eval, like we did last year? Did we find that useful? If we'd like to do one, we can also do something like that.
I think we did it electronic, it's like a survey monkey thing.
Yep, yeah, I'm sure that was a Survey Monkey thing. And I think we need to tweak some of those questions, because I think we put that together rather rapidly.
I think we should look at that before we use that instrument again. I think we should look at
We
it.
do the other
I
a couple of
agree.
us
So-
looking at it, and maybe you wanna be one of them. No, not to volunteer, but if we used it to be helpful for the retreat planning. So if we were to wanna turn it around that quickly, we could either use the same thing, tweak it a little, ask 1 or 2 people to tweak it and send it out, just if we decide it's a worthwhile exercise because it's generally good practice.
So,
Not because we're gonna ignore it, but just because if we want it to provide us information to plan, then we need to have it soon.
is that something we would like to have available at the retreat to help us? Or are we okay seeing this at the August meeting?
August meeting just is pretty busy.
Yeah, August meeting's pretty busy.
So
I do think it becomes if you want to do it, having the results at the retreat is the best.
I would think so too.
That's where we discussed a lot of it and hashed out a lot of things that
Right.
had become evident when you put everything together that
Right.
you wouldn't think about.
So do we want to form a Tiger team that can take a quick look at that? They can probably do this all via email and electronically with each other. I don't know if we need a face-to-face meeting for them to tweak it.
Yeah.
Who
We just
would,
need to get you last year's survey.
would you have that available?
I'm sure.
I have it, I
I
have a
don't know
paper,
right now, but
I have a
I'm sure.
paper copy of it, I'm sure.
I'd recommend the executive committee put their heads together ASAP and do it.
I thought I was gonna tag out with you, John.
Well,
I didn't groan first.
hey, the guys meet all the time and do things to direct this, so do this one.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any problem with
Yeah.
Okay.
that? So that's what we're, thanks a hell of a lot, Don, I'll remember this.
Yeah.
All right, so, moving on, I'll take the lead on this, I'll get something out to the rest of the executive committee. June retreat.
Sorry, but I have to go without you.
Oh, that's brilliant, just like Dan,
Yeah.
I told you,
I got what I wanted, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
I didn't even know I was gonna get it. I do have to be on a conference call.
Yeah.
See you in June.
See you then.
So this is really your opportunity to give us some ideas about topics, activities you would like for the June retreat. We are having our staff retreat next week, which is why I really hope the legislature is still meeting, because I think we've booked an escape room for ourselves. So we're going to be doing our own team building exercise. But you know, we had talked about, I think, continued, it's a good opportunity for us to come back to you with sort of the conclusion of all the strategic plan monitoring report. What we do every year is sort of like put all of it together. So what did we do this year, and what does that mean in terms of our progress towards our goals? We're going to be going into the third year of the strategic plan, so retreat is a really good time for you all to talk about where you see the priorities shifting in the coming year. We also talked about continuing to focus on member engagement. Susan has some really great ideas around board development that we want to engage you all in, but we didn't want to plan the whole day without you all telling us what you want to focus on. So, do we have any?
I mean, I will vote for Susan's two items, because those are the two that were gonna be at the top of my list is, you know, I think our member engagement still,
Yep.
it's still not there.
Yep.
Right, and I don't know what we need to just, and I will always advocate for, board members knowing how to do their job better.
Right.
Could we expand that to include how do we recruit board members, not just how do we, once you get suckered into the job, how do we
VSBA
For
board members
VSBA board or
or
local board?
local board?
both?
Okay.
Yeah.
Board recruitment and retention.
We'll have an update on the votes recommendations.
On the what?
On the votes, the voting.
You guys will be ready with something?
I think, we think we will be ready.
Okay, okay, that'd be good.
We went back, posed a lot of questions today, got a lot of answers, and are waiting a couple more, so I feel confident you'll have it. Exactly, you'll have us there.
I was about to say, if Kim thinks this will be done, it'll be done. But then no.
We turned on you.
These retreats, I think they're important and they're very good for team building and we ought to do more of them. But just a quick personal experience at our new supervisor union, we said, we're gonna book a retreat, you know, for June where we could work on this. We're a brand new board. very dispersed, you know, there's a lot of distrust and infighting, the perfect thing that that team needs to be. And there's enough former board members, not former, old-time board members that explain just how much of a waste of time one more meeting is this summer, and they normally take the summer off, and if we need to do any retreat, we'll just put it on the agenda as an item, and we'll spend 15 minutes on it during a meeting. And that doesn't make a great lot of sense, it's not going to do it. But I've been involved in a lot of things that I voted against the motion and lost, it doesn't matter. We won't be having the retreat, but, you know, it's, to your point, how do you recruit these? This is the one thing that people need instead of sitting there harping at one another during the meeting.
Right,
You
right.
know, we gotta learn how to work as a team, even if we disagree. I don't know how we get that across to the public. That's maybe something we need to work on, a vehicle to do that, because I know it's not an isolated case.
To that idea, and I don't have anything in mind at all, but maybe one element of our retreat would have the feel of some common board learning for us, which is a good idea in modeling what we would think our local board retreats might look like. I don't know that there's a particular topic coming to mind for me, but maybe it's about how to do our job.
Neil has some thoughts.
Either that or the executive committee, one of the two.
How to do our job better or something.
It's my turn to leave now.
No, you just have to be very red next time. Come and testify, no lunch for you.
So you mean like having a guest speaker come?
No, I don't know necessarily.
Yeah.
I honestly have nothing in mind, and I wouldn't want it to take time that we have targeted for other things. But sometimes as you learn together as a board, it helps problems like that because you start to then hold each other accountable differently.
Right.
So maybe something will be obvious from a board self-assessment that we send out, or maybe it won't be, but maybe some example of something that we would each take back with us is something we would encourage for use in our own board. And I don't mean that it has to like blow us all away, but just some.
That might not be a bad idea if we got 20 minutes from some motivational speaker that talks about putting groups together, and diverse groups. I mean, we've all been exposed to some of it, but there are a lot of people around that do that kind of stuff.
So, and also I'd like to put in a plug for some fun and.
Yes, I was just going to say that.
Team building type
Yes.
activity. One thing we talked about was maybe like karaoke. Or, like going over to Berlin Pond and going for a walk, or like getting out and just having some
No karaoke.
fresh air. And I actually have a portable karaoke microphone.
No,
so
no
we can do that on the walk.
You're scaring all the wildlife.
I think we gotta be careful, I don't know what the travel time is between those 2 points, but I think we gotta be careful, because that adds up more than what you think.
I know.
Yeah.
Maybe we
But
just go sit outside behind the building.
No, I think fun should be,
Karaoke for each other.
People will be like, what are they doing?
I think fun should be written in, because it does,
Yeah.
the better we get to know each other, the more we trust each other, the more we trust each other, then obviously the freer the conversation. And so I'm all in favor of team building, bonding, fun stuff. We've done that in the past, and I think it works out really well. Laura Lee, do you have something to say?
I was just gonna suggest something. When I did my wood badge training for Boy Scouts, we had venturing crew and they came and did COPE activities.
What kind of activity?
COPE, C-O-P-E,
Okay.
which is the type of, I'm not sure what the acronym stands for. Isn't that terrible?
I will look into it.
But I mean, we were all of varying physical ableness and non-ableness and ages, and we were all able to do it. And it was kind of cool having young people lead us
Yeah.
also, because they were, they run from adventurers are 14 to 21 years old. And I would imagine around here, there's got to be at least one crew somewhere around.
My daughter happens to be a director of Boy Scouts, so
There you
Probably
go.
find that
I
out.
did
Well, we
that
will
for
look
many
into
years.
some
For those
way
of you
to.
who haven't, this will be your first retreat, there'll be lunch there for you, and there'll be some breakfast.
Breakfast, you
So come hungry.
Hungry to learn.
Yes,
Maybe this is all taken care of, but I understand you're leaving. Is there anything we need to do to get a new president?
the process for a new president, so yes, I am done. So the process for a new president is, in the August meeting, we elect a new one. The current president continues to be the president until the end of the October annual meeting at Lake Maury. And then my term will be finished and the new one takes over then. So it's a board election.
Anybody
So-
can be nominated.
Anybody can be nominated who's on the board.
And we will talk of this, our plan was to talk this through at the June retreat, just sort of the process,
Yeah, because, I mean,
and
my impression
requirements.
is there's a lot of work, a lot of time.
It's not insurmountable.
Well,
Yeah.
of course it's not.
Yeah,
It depends on the person also.
what are you saying?
I
I don't know if that's good or bad.
The way the election works, they elect the president in August. All the other
Yes.
officers are elected after the regional meetings and after.
In November.
In November. So it's like a split election. So then unless you.
Some people like to talk on the phone longer than you do. You're like down to business, which is great.
I didn't know you wanted to talk on the
No,
phone.
some people do.
I'll talk to you more than you want me to. I just figured we'd have business to conduct and I
That's
gotta
right,
go
no,
work.
that's great. That's great.
Until the beer came out, and then I couldn't get him to sleep before 2 o'clock in the morning. That's when he had his talking shoes on.
She's recording now.
Yeah, it's on me, but for the record, Neil O'Dell.
Yeah, it was Neil O'Dell staying up late every night in San Antonio. I kept saying, Neil, it's time to go to bed. And Neil would go, one more. All right, anything else for the June agenda?
Sorry.
Okay, so I think that you got something
we
to
got
work with. And obviously the board self-assessment will be in there somewhere. I don't- So consent agenda, do I have a motion to approve it? It should say April minutes. It says the March minutes.
I'll make a motion.
We've got the motion from Laura Lee. We've got a second from Amy. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Any new business? Anything that people would like to talk about? We actually have 10 minutes spare. So you want to talk about your new dog?
My son left his dog when he came home from spring break. He left this with a 8-week-old lab puppy.
Oh my God!
How old?
It's great that you guys think it's sweet. He hasn't slept more than 4 hours in a
I'm personally horrified because the last thing I want now that I don't have my kids in the house is to have a dog.
Okay, that's enough. I'm getting a puppy in literally 3 weeks, so let's just talk about how cute it is.
I was just kidding when I said talk about dogs, by the way. We could leave. Neil, you have actual business or do you want to talk about your dog?
Not about the dog, no, I just will say, so this week is Teacher Appreciation Week.
Yes.
In case this is an idea for you guys, we this year departed from our tradition and we rented an ice cream truck. And we drove it to all of the schools and gave the teachers free ice cream. And it
That's a
seemed
great
like
idea
it
for
was
a
very
retreat.
well received, so.
Oh, that's so nice.
Free ice cream is always very well received.
The kids do, everybody.
No, we had to time it such that the kids were already gone. So there was some really accurate timing that had to happen there. And,
How many
And at 6:30 in the morning?
4 schools.
We've in the past for Teachers Appreciation is we just found some food and took it in. Teachers in the break room love free food.
Right.
You know, whether it's bagels or what, something different, you know, and just the note that says, thank you for doing a good job. And, you know, not a lot of money and it gets commented on and it's something you can someone can do, or two people can do fairly easily. Not that your idea isn't great, but we've done something in it, I know it winds up being appreciated.
Can I just tell our story? We, the board set aside $1,200 this year. We've always done what you did, right? The board members themselves would go out and buy something. And anyway, the school, we got a new food service group that's doing an amazing job. So we decided to hire this new food service group because it's more revenue for them and so on and so forth. So the superintendent sent out an email to everybody and we got inundated with reply comments about how the staff in the kitchen shouldn't have to do an appreciation breakfast for everyone else because they're just as much as the staff. Oh my goodness. They ended up with bagels. Yeah, it was really, I
No
mean,
good thought goes unpunished. Yeah.
I know, that was it. And one of the responses of the superintendent, I wish he had done it earlier, but maybe it would have helped a little bit, but one of the responses was, look, we have a policy, you don't reply all when you're complaining. Which I didn't know, but I guess I would hope the teachers would know.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, it was a bummer.
Yeah.
It is, we've just always done teacher appreciation lunches by the PTO.
That's what ours do.
You know, and the school makes sure, the administration makes sure that everybody can eat at the same time. And, you know, so we hire a sub or two to do recess. They always like it.